By the tawfiq and the awn of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the topic that I've chosen for this blessed Friday and this blessed afternoon is the following. Why our youth are leaving Islam? Why our youth are leaving Islam? SubhanAllah, in the early 80s and the early 90s, a lot of parents growing up here who came from abroad, who came from back home, they thought that the biggest problem and the greatest fear facing their kids at that period or that time, without a shadow of a doubt, hands down, bar none, had to do with drugs. There were many drugs that were being portrayed and given out on the market that were spreading like wildfire. And so parents thought at that time that the greatest fear then facing their children was that someday their children would try drugs, and from that they would later on inevitably become drug addicts. Whether it be using pot, whether it be using methamphetamine, whether it be using cocaine, crack. There are so many drugs out there, and of course from the 80s we've come a long way. There are so many new drugs that are being put on the market today. And when I'm speaking of drugs, I'm not speaking of the drugs that you get at the pharmacy. I'm not talking about that drug. I'm talking about things that literally crush you, destroy you mentally, emotionally, and physically. However, there's something that is even greater on the market today. And if you were to ask any parent today, what is the greatest fear that you have concerning your loved ones? If they're truly aware and cognizant of what has taken place in the environment and in the world, in their own community, they would probably say, the greatest thing, the greatest fear I have for my children is for my child to come to me someday and say, Ya Abi, Ya Abati, Ya Ummah, La u'minu bi wujudillah. The greatest fear would be that your child, who you've loved, cared for, nurtured, clothed, fed, you've worked hours around the clock, you've compromised your sleep, you've compromised your wealth, you've compromised your health, you've compromised everything for the well-being of these little ones. For them to come to you someday and say, Dad, I don't think there's a God out there. Mom, I no longer believe in God. Dad, I no longer believe in God. I no longer believe that there's a creator behind everything that we see displayed in front of our very own eyes. That in itself has to be, without a shadow of a doubt, the scariest thing that a parent can do. So drugs are dangerous, cocaine is dangerous, all these drugs are dangerous. But when a person uses these drugs, there's hope for them to seek and get rehabilitated later on, and for them to make tawbah later on. But usually when someone leaves a religion or leaves a faith tradition, usually they've made a decision and there's probably, most likely, no reconciliation after that. Generally speaking, when people leave a faith tradition, and this is something, by the way, that Christians are suffering from, Jews are suffering from, and Muslims are also struggling with. It is not an exception with the Muslim Ummah per se. Many people of many faith traditions are struggling with this great problem. And that is that they feel like they have no control over their newer generation. And that is that they're being exposed to so much material, so much literature out there, and it's not being censored, and they themselves are not equipped intellectually to handle a lot of these problems. So what they do is they find themselves leaving the fold of Islam. So Christians are complaining about this, Muslims are complaining about this, and Jews are also complaining about this. And I am honestly, personally, I don't know what's worse. For a Muslim to say I'm leaving Islam for Judaism, or for a Muslim to say I'm leaving Islam for Christianity, or for a Muslim to say I'm leaving Islam because I believe there's no God. I really don't know what's worse on the scale. So our perception as parents has to change. And even, subhanAllah, growing up, we want to make sure who they're befriending, where they're at, the family, what are they doing, the times, when are they coming home. We're very, very, vigilant, right? We want to know everything about them. However, subhanAllah, the difference, I think the greatest difference from this generation and that of the past is the way we were raised. And I had a glimpse of this at my early ages, and that is that before, al-ab yurabbi, العم يربي، الخال يربي، العمة تربي، الكل يربي، المدير يربي، المعلم يربي، الأستاذ، الكل يعلم. Before growing up, the whole community raised your child. The whole community raised your child. The person selling bread down, from a block away from you, he used to raise your child. Your teacher at school raised you. Your sports teacher raised you. Your neighbors raised you. Your uncle raised you. Your auntie raised you. The whole community raised you. And what I mean by that is that this in itself is absent in America. There's no such thing as the whole community raising your child. In fact, it's the complete contrary. It's the opposite. So back home, the community at large kept your child in check. I remember growing up in my early ages in Tunis, and that is that when we were young, we were afraid that Uncle Fulan would pass by and see us doing certain things. Or my aunt would walk by. Or my teacher from my first period would see me, and so we would do things in secret. We did not boast of our sins. We did not come in public and say, look at my sins, what do you think? Give me a hooray, give me a subhanallah, give me a masha'Allah. We didn't have none of that growing up. So the community kept the children in check. Everybody was raising the children back home. And so that in itself, it's good because it creates a safe haven for the child. And if they did anything stupid, anything out of place, they did it momentarily, and they did it in secret where no one is able to see them or to see exactly what it is they're doing. And there was a hayat. There was a hayat before, that when we saw the elderly, we had great respect for them. If we were doing something stupid, the minute we would see an elderly person walk by, we would stop and we would kind of get in line like this. Today, that no longer exists. Today, even as an uncle, or if you walk in and you're basically visiting your nephews and nieces, they come and give you salams, their eyes are in the iPad and their hands are shaking your hand. Isn't that true? Assalamu alaikum, they do this. Assalamu alaikum, Ami, how are you? MashaAllah, good to see you. Ami, assalamu alaikum. We didn't do that before. When our aunts and uncles visited us in the past, it's as if we had a president in our presence. We were so excited to see the uncle and the aunt come by. Times have completely changed. And I'm not drifting off of topic here, but what I want to say is that the point here is times have drastically changed from the past. Before, the aunts, the uncles, the whole community, it was raising your child, right? If you did something wrong, or if you came to school with a nasty haircut, if your pants were sagging, or you didn't look up to par, your teacher probably disciplined you physically, yes, and then you went home and you got another physical discipline at home. So you were put in check whether you like it or not. And when we were young, we didn't scream my teacher's being judgmental. My teacher thinks she's self-righteous. We didn't used to throw out these cards that we hear the newer generation play out today, which we're going to come to in a bit, inshallah ta'ala. So the teacher grabbed you by the ear, probably sent you home. Your mom, upon seeing you, probably gave you another spanking or disciplined you however she saw fit. And it kept going. If you did something stupid a block away, your neighbor grabbed you by the ear, pulled you and brought you home, and complained and said to your mom or dad, do you know what I caught your son doing? He was doing this and this and that. So you got disciplined by the neighbor, and then you got another discipline when you were at home. And we as children, we took it in. What did we used to tell ourselves? I need to get my act together. There was no such thing as, oh my God, everybody's being so judgmental these days. La 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 la. We had none of that back then. This is unfortunately what we have today. Welcome to the new world. Welcome to the new world. The minute you say something is haram, you're being judgmental. You hurt my emotions, brother. Don't talk about it like that. Should have said nicely. Talk about Jahannam in a nice, politically correct way. What? Yeah, talk about hellfire in a very nice way. Show me how. Show me how to do that. This is unbelievable. Today, who's raising our children by contrast? Do you know who's raising our children today? YouTube. Philosophy professors. Professors who use fancy language that a lot of our youth probably don't understand. They use linguistic sophistry to seduce a lot of the younger generation who have absolutely no idea what the professor's talking about, but because he comes off as being intellectually upright, if you will, incoherent, and fancy words are being thrown out here and there, that youngster's looking at that and is confused by that. Who else is raising our children? Facebook. Who else is raising our children? Twitter. The internet. Our phones. That today when you're around your niece or nephew and you guys are just, hey, we stopped by. Every 3 to 5 minutes you're talking with your niece and nephew, and every 3 to 5 minutes they feel like they have to look at their phone. Because they're so important. Because they have businesses they're running, they have kids they're raising. I'm being sarcastic, they're only 10 and 12 years old, by the way. But every 2 to 3 minutes they have to look at their phone. Because they're so important, they have so many things going on. So who's raising our kids today? it's no longer the hamma, it's no longer the khal, it's no longer the uncle, it's no longer the community, it's the YouTube generation, it's the Facebook, it's the Twitter, it's the Instagram, it's the duck phone face paint. This is the generation we have. The minute we go and we eat, we have to let the whole world know that we went to a restaurant and that my husband took me out. So what do? Now we have to have the whole world know that I'm out with my husband or I'm out with my wife. For what? Lish. Privacy is something that should be cherished. Before, people used to tell people that, hey, if the neighbor asks you where you're going, just let them know we're going to this place. Even though you're not going there, you're going somewhere else. You don't want everybody knowing your business. Today, we voluntarily give this information away for the whole world to know what we're doing, how we're doing it, and who we're doing it with. Moving on, so the times we grew up in, brothers and sisters, is very, very different than the times that we're living in and experiencing here today. And from that, I want to move to the next step. What are the reasons? Why are our youth leaving Islam? For what particular reason? I recently heard a video. In 20 seconds into the video, I was displeased by the video, by the content of the video. Because 20 seconds into the video, there was this animation of a young man explaining why he left Islam. And he said it like this: why is it that every time I walk into the mosque, the sheikh is yelling at the top of his lungs? Let me talk about that. So when you as a sheikh talk at the top of your lungs, that's a turn off for the newer generation, basically. So in other words, the message is that if you're yelling, this is a distraction and it's a turn off for the newer generation. So what does that mean by implication? It means that the khatibs should tone it down a bit. Be nice, cordial. Hey, make sure you don't land yourself in the fire. It's a bad place for you, bro. Don't do it. Stay away, stay alive. MashaAllah. That's how people want to hear it. This is, talk about hijab, you have to be absolutely 100% politically correct about it. Because if you say that sister doing it this way is wrong, you're judgmental, you're self-righteous, you've condemned everybody to hell. Say it nicely. Today, everything has to be presented in such a politically correct way. It is. So here's the problem with the sheikh. The sheikh himself is against a lot of problems. Here's why. Before, when your uncle said what you're doing is wrong, your neighbor said what you're doing is wrong, your teacher said what you're doing is wrong, the local man at the local market said what you're doing is wrong, and then when you came home, your parents also told you that what you're doing is wrong. Your hairstyle is not appropriate, you need to pull your pants up, just as an example. So you didn't look at anybody as judgmental. As a young man, you thought to yourself like, I really need to get myself together. Today, none of that is happening. So what happens is, the only person speaking and engaging the youth in public and in general is who? The imams. So who's the judgmental prick, quote unquote? It's the imam. Because they're no longer hearing it from the teacher. The teacher in their public school, if they're holding hands with the opposite gender, the opposite sex, or they have boyfriends and girlfriends, they're encouraging them. Muhammad, is that your new girlfriend, Aisha? You guys look so sweet together, unbelievable. MashaAllah. Back home, you didn't have that. If your teacher saw you do that, he'd probably, discipline you, right? He'd probably put you in check. So today, the newer generation, no one is telling them that what they're doing is wrong. Get your act together. No one is doing that. No one is doing it at school. No one is doing it at their job. The only place they're hearing it is at the masjid. And who has the luxury and the advantage of presenting this judgmental language? Me, the khatib. So they walk out, they're programmed that no one in the community tells them that what they're doing is wrong, the way their dress is inappropriate. Who has the luxury of telling them that what they're doing is wrong? I myself, the khatib. So now I become the judgmental, arrogant, self-righteous prick. That's the way we're portrayed. And when you exhibit a bit of passion, you're all of a sudden saying to people that you're arrogant, you know it all, and everybody's going to hell. No, that's not what it means. Why is it that when people are downtown protesting for miles on end, the more they increase their voice, and the more you can hear their voice from miles away, the more props and high fives they get. And this is when it comes to them fighting, because they call themselves social justice warriors. So when they're downtown and they're fighting for the rights of other human beings, that's acceptable. When they're yelling at the top of their lungs, everybody's like, hooray, hooray, what an awesome job, guys, keep going. Why is it that when the khatib comes here, defending and seeking the rights of Allah, it's no longer acceptable for the khatib to raise his voice? Isn't that duplicity? Isn't that hypocrisy? Again, I want to repeat the question. Why is it that when someone comes on the minbar and is passionate because we're talking about the rights of Allah here, that's not acceptable, that's judgmental. But when someone does it for a social justice cause, even if the cause might be against Islam, by the way, that's all of a sudden acceptable and okay, and kudos to you and props to you. But we don't extend the same courtesy to the khatib when he comes up here. Can I ask why? For the newer, fair generation, for the millennials, mashallah, why is that? Why do you not extend the same courtesy that you do to your social activist? Lish. So that's one problem. Is that because there's not many people saying that this is inappropriate, you shouldn't dress this way, you shouldn't behave like that, and the only person left to do that in the community is who? Is the sheikh, the imam, the khatib. So who's left now to blame? The khatib. Which leads me to my next point. The newer generation, to be honest, they do not know something called constructive criticism. They don't want to hear it, period. You tell them the minute you tell them that what they're doing is wrong, all of a sudden, the fingers are pointed at you. Who are you to judge me? You don't know what's in my heart. Only Allah can judge me. You don't know my intention. Are you the haram police? The cards never stop. Shh. You know you have 10 credit cards in your wallet. One is US Bank, one is Bank of America, one is Wells Fargo, one is TCF. The newer generation, this is what they're good at. Not all of them. I'm sure none of you here, with the exception with those here. But this is what we do. The minute you tell the newer generation something is haram, it's as if you rob them of all their possessions. It's as if you strip them down and they have nothing left on them. They don't know how to take it. Constructive criticism is not in their menu. Who are you to tell me it's haram? It's unbelievable. Why? Because we're extra super duper soft. And I think we imams bear somewhat of the burden as well when I'd say 97% of the lectures in the al-khitab al-dini على الانترنت حاليا, all of it is targhib, none of it is tarhib. The majority, the speech in America today, the majority of it revolves around two things. Allah is most gracious, most merciful. Whatever you do, Allah is not going to, hold you accountable for it. Just make sure that you remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most gracious, most merciful. Do whatever you want. So when someone comes along and talks about the hellfire, or talks about self-accountability, for instance, the newer generation is left in limbo. What? He was so aggressive. Why did he have to talk about it that way? Do you know why? Because the khatibs and imams were not all on the same page. You have some, their only focus and concern is to talk about the mercy of Allah and how wonderful of a job the youth are doing. Never tell them what they're doing is wrong. Be an encouraging factor. I'm all for that. But to what degree? Should there not be a balance? The whole Quran has in it two things: targhib and tarhib. Incentive and deterrent. Allah talks about hell, but He also talks about paradise. When you talk so much about paradise, and this is across the spectrum, this is kind of the language. Jannah, Allah is most gracious, most merciful. Don't lose hope in Allah, and I'm all for that. I've given lectures and series about this, but that's not going to be my only focus. There has to be self-accountability. That when the imam tells you that you have to pull up your pants, young man, or sister, I've got to be honest, the hijab is not about wearing tight clothes and attracting attention to people. That's under Islam, that's called a concern. That's not called being judgmental. No one is condemning you to hell. All we're saying is that's wrong. So instead of walking out, before when you walked out with your son, what did you guys tell each other? Wallahi, the sheikh said it's haram, it's haram. The first generation, when they heard something is haram or not right, they walked out. At least this is the way I walked out when I was young. I was like, I need to do some self-introspection. I need to do some reflecting. I need to change. In other words, we were accountable. The second generation came along and said, I know it's haram, but it should have been said nicely. The third generation is, who are you to say it's haram? You guys see the transition? The first generation said it's haram, khalas, we have to stop, we have to make tawbah. The second generation came along and said, it's haram, but we have to say it a bit nicely. The third generation today is, hold on, who is he to say it's haram? You guys see how we've developed and evolved, mashallah, right? Unfortunately. So what do we do today is when we leave, we put all the blame on the khatib. So instead of the young man changing himself, or the young sister changing herself and acknowledging that what they're doing is wrong, they put all the blame, they have that victim mentality card. No, there's absolutely nothing wrong with me. I'm okay. Allah doesn't look at the outside anyways. Allah just looks at just looks at your heart. I don't have to do anything. The khatib was a judgmental prick. He thinks he knows it all. He didn't use any wisdom. He was awfully aggressive, and I didn't like his approach, and I didn't like his tone. So what do you find yourself as a khatib? You find yourself now being the enemy of the generation that you're trying to help and pull out of the fire. Why? Because of the victim mentality. There's no constructive criticism that's being levied. What is wrong with constructive criticism? Why is it that when your boss at work tells you that what you're doing is wrong, you say, thank you, Mr. Johnson, I will do better next time. But when your khatib tells you that maybe what you're doing is wrong, قامت الدنيا ولم تقعد. When your khatib or imam tells you about something is halal or haram, he's judgmental and he thinks he's better than you. But when your boss at work tells you that what you're doing is wrong, you take it and you're okay with it. It sits well with you, right? My boss said I need to change and I need to do something different. That's all kudos, that's all okay. But when the khatib does it, all of a sudden, oh, he's the scary ghost. Come on. What generation are we raising if everything has to be said in a nice, oh, just make sure, don't hurt the feelings, it's okay. I'm all for using wisdom. But to what degree? Does that mean that we have to manipulate the meanings of the Quran? We have to change the meanings? We have to change the terminology? No, not at all. Another issue is that a lot of the younger, not a lot, but the younger generation, generally speaking, they are so infatuated by the free society that they're living in that they themselves want to remove themselves from what is called, quote unquote, the shackles of Islam. In other words, they like the idea that the non-Muslim has a boyfriend, has a girlfriend, they can go whatever they want, they can go to prom, they can do whatever they want, they have no guides, no limitation, no framework to work within. So that the Muslim today sees himself or herself as being shackled down in chains. And Islam is all of a sudden an infringement on one's liberties. So they see that from across a distance and they're like, Islam telling me I can't have a boyfriend, I can't have a girlfriend, I can't dress the way I want, I can't go to prom. Oh my God, Islam says I can't do anything. Are you really being honest with yourself? Is Islam really telling you that everything is haram, everything is impermissible? La wallah, absolutely not. But guess what? When we look at it this way, that's what happens. So for them to remove that guilt, for the brother who has a girlfriend, for the sister who has a boyfriend and she's sneaking out or he's sneaking out or whatever the case may be, for them to remove that guilt, the way they think that they're going to cure this problem is by them leaving Islam wholeheartedly, so then they can have the boyfriend, they can have the girlfriend, they can go to prom, they can go to the movies, they can do, I'm not saying movies are haram by the way, I'm just saying movies, go to the movies with your boyfriend and girlfriend, having the popcorn, the soda and all that good stuff, right? Do you guys get my point here? There are some of our youth who are going down that route, that they think that Islam is coming to say everything is impermissible and the only thing left for you is just, let me just leave Islam. So they don't want to be held accountable. And subhanAllah, that's why I believe it's very, very important for us as parents to work on something called definitions. Properly defining terms according to what Islam establishes. For an example, when you look at hijab under a postmodern mindset, it's considered subjugation or oppression. Under Islam, it's virtuous. It is something noble. It is something good. It's called modesty. Revelation, under a postmodern mindset, it's called a fairy tale. Under Islam, it's called truth. A man's ghayra, a man's protective jealousy for his wife. In Islam, that's considered rujula. Rujula, it's called being a man. That's something that's praiseworthy. You want a man who has a ghayra for your daughter. You want a man who, when he marries your daughter, he has khayrah, he's worried about her. Under postmodernism, they look at you and they say, oh, you're insecure. You have a problem. You don't allow your wife to go to the club and have girls' night. You have a problem. No, in Islam it's called rujula. Applying the laws as well under Islam, when you look at it, that's called an assurance to your overall well-being. Under postmodernism, they look at it and say this is an infringement on your overall liberties. It's all about how you define these things. When you look at the rights and obligations between the sexes, between the woman and the man, under Islam, that's viewed as justice. Under postmodernism, that's considered to be discrimination between the genders. It's all about what mindset you have. Are you going to appreciate it or not? The other problem, I think, which is probably arguably the greatest problem facing our youth today, is that they're exposed to what we call misconceptions, and they're not intellectually equipped to rebuttal or reply to a lot of these misconceptions. So what do? First is they embody certain constructs that are not of Islam. This is important. This is tricky, by the way. For the youth, please listen to me, give me your undivided attention for the next 5 minutes. Some of our youth, what they'll do is they'll embrace and take in certain constructs that are not of Islam. In other words, Islam does not necessarily approve of. For instance, feminism. Islam does not approve of feminism. Islam is all about women's rights, but it's not about feminism. Islam is about women's rights and offering them and guaranteeing them their rights. But Islam is not about feminism, because there's no such thing as equality between the genders. There's justice, not equality. And so what happens is that you might find a sister, for instance, who embodies, she loves the concept of feminism. And so what she'll do is she'll go to the Quran, and I've seen people on a panel talking about these things. They'll come and they'll say certain verses in the Quran, and this is called cherry picking, by the way. For instance, Allah fi Surah Al-Ahzab says, إِنَّ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَالْمُسْلِمَاتِ وَالْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ, to the end of the verse. The believing men, the believing women, and so on and so forth. Allah mentions both of the sexes, right? The male and the female. So people will sit there in front of a non-Muslim audience and say, ha, see, Islam is all about gender equality. That's deceptive when you do not also present the other verses where Allah says, الرِّجَالُ قَوَّمُونَ مَعَ النِّسَاءِ. No, الرِّجَالُ قَوَّمُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. Interpret it however you want, but it doesn't mean that men are caretakers with women. It means that men are caretakers over women. What do you do with that verse? For a feminist today, she's going to have a problem with that. You have to change that ala to mean ma'a. Okay? Because the word ala in Arabic does not mean with. Or when Allah says, وَلِلْرِجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً, and men have a degree over women, what do you do with that verse? You just leave it and you hide it? Where Allah says, وَلِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ, that a man has double the portion of the inheritance than the woman. And of course there are reasons for this. I can't go into the whys, but what we do is we go and we address non-Muslim audiences, and we think we're trying to convince them that, hey, see, Islam is also all about equality. Islam is all about feminism. No, it's not. So the first problem is that some of our Muslim youth, they'll embody these ideas, these constructs, and then their first move is they'll go to Islam, the Quran or Sunnah, and they'll try to find verses or prophetic traditions that validate that belief. Their first step is they'll try to manipulate the text. So when it's put under the microscope of feminism, they say, ha, see, Islam is all about feminism. If they cannot manipulate the text, their second thing is to discard the Quran or the Sunnah. They'll say, I know Al-Bukhari said it, but this is probably one of those quote-unquote fabricated hadith. The third step is they leave Islam wholeheartedly. Why? Because they've embodied, they've embraced an idea that Islam doesn't advocate, and it should have been the other way around. Instead of using Islam as the lens to see whether Islam accepts it or not, they've done the opposite. They've embraced an idea, and now they want to make sure that it can fit properly and adequately under Islam. And when that doesn't happen, some of them are disappointed and they end up leaving Islam. Why? Because in their eyes, according to them, feminism is an ideal that we should all strive for. And if Islam is the last religion for mankind, and Islam does not advocate it, then this cannot be a religion from God. So what do? Inevitably? They end up leaving Islam. Yeah, Nas, it's a tricky tool out there. And I know when I say the word feminism, I'm sure for anybody watching this, some of our sisters might be thinking, he's a misogynistic prick. He hates women. No, I love women. I have daughters. I have a wife. I have a mother. I'm for women's rights, but I'm not for feminism. If feminism is about equal rights with men, look, men do not have equal rights with women. So women cannot have equal rights with men. And I feel like I have to say both. So people look at you as being fair and transparent. You always have to say both. There's no such thing as equal rights with men, but there's also no such thing as equal rights with women. Our rights and obligation are drastically different from one another. I can't go into this right now. Number two, because time is very fast. Number two is when some of the non-Muslims today, they hear about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, for instance, Mary and Aisha at the age of 9. The younger generation looks at that and says, oh, dude, my Prophet married Aisha at the age of 9? Impossible. I'm sure she must have been older and Bukhari had it all wrong. He didn't know what he was talking about. So what do? Because we cannot intellectually engage in these kind of conversations, we immediately go and we discount what Bukhari said. Bukhari had it all wrong. No, she was an 8, I'm sure she was 18 and 19, Bukhari had it wrong. Because why? According to our times, I agree. It is not normal for a 9-year-old to marry a man, above 50. I agree, today it's not normal. And we Muslims, we're not marrying our daughters at that young age. But to say that this did not happen 15 centuries ago, simply because we do not approve of it socially today, that is moronic. That's not a way to discount a hadith. So we hear a lot of these misconceptions, and the average Muslim is left in complete dismay. And then Sheikh, and then they come back to the Sheikh, they're running, right? They don't know what to do. Sheikh. Look, is it true that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ married a 9-year-old? No way, Sheikh. No, Sheikh, this cannot happen. Do you know why? We have failed to a certain degree to counter these misconceptions before they're exposed to them outside. That's precisely why some of our youth do not know, they don't know how to rebuttal or how to react when they hear a lot of these misconceptions. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على من بعث رحمة للعالمين. So I think we've went into depth somewhat to a certain degree about why our Muslim youth are leaving Islam. The biggest problem that I see happening with our younger generation is that we're pushing them to become doctors. We're pushing them to become lawyers. We're pushing them to become engineers. We're pushing them to become a pharmacist. We're pushing them to become whatever it is you want. And do I personally have a problem with that? Absolutely not. Go for the best. Go for it. Choose the best. Have high aspirations. Have lofty goals. But at the expense of what are we doing this as parents? That's the question. If that's all I'm worried about, and that's all I'm preoccupying myself and kids with, is make sure you get a high GPA, make sure you get this, make sure you get that. A lot of our youth, they end up leaving Islam when they hit the college scene. Which I'm not going to say now, don't send them to college, I'm not implying that. But if there's not a balance, our problem is there's not a balance. There's not a balance. We parents, we cannot have the mentality of back home while we're living here. You as a parent, you are legally responsible in the sight of Allah to know what is going on today in your own community, the contemporary issues. There might be issues that are important back home, but they're irrelevant for your 10-year-old daughter or for your 15-year-old son. They're just irrelevant. They don't want to hear about it. There are more important things. So you as a parent, we have to step up to the plate. We have to know what are the contemporary misconceptions going around out there. My child, what is he watching on the internet? What is he watching? What is he doing? It's not enough just to say, get a nice GPA and make sure you become a doctor someday and make me happy as your parent. That's not enough. What good is it when your doctor Muhammad comes at the age of 30 and says, I've become a doctor, but Baba, Mama, I no longer believe in God. What good is that? Wallahi, I'm sure you would have wished for him to stay at work in a menial task, in a low-paying job, and he didn't do anything, but he's still a Muslim. You'd probably prefer that. I'm not against, and I don't want to call it Western sciences, because these are not Western sciences. These are sciences that Muslims have always excelled in. But because the khitab is born, what we do is we separate between the two. There are Muslim sciences and there are worldly sciences. No, they're all done together. They complement one another. So we as parents, we have to understand that attacking and talking about these problems first. Because what happens is if they hear it outside, they're going to think that either A, my parent doesn't know about him, or B, my parents are hiding these misconceptions from me. And if your little ones think that you're hiding something from them to keep them in the fold of Islam, that's even worse. Talk about them, they're out there, because the ulama fil madi, they used to say, لا لإثارة الشبهاء على الملأ. طيب? It is not permissible to talk about these crazy misconceptions out in public in front of the common folk. But guess what? You can no longer apply that today. Because our youth, they're ahead of us. They're ahead of us. They've already heard a lot of these misconceptions on YouTube, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter. They heard a lot about these misconceptions. You're not going to come 2 years later and say, I'm not going to talk to my daughter about this. Your daughter knew about it 3-4 years ago. What are you talking about? Your son heard about that misconception that you're still questioning. Should I talk to him about it? Should I not? Maybe it's not the right time. Your son has been exposed to this misconception 3-4 years ago, and you're still debating. Should you talk with your son or not? It's important. We have to equip them intellectually. We have to equip them so they're confident Muslims. Not any little thing, they're all of a sudden, oh my God. La. ما ينفع, ما ينفع. So we as parents, we have to take this business seriously. يا أيها الذين آمنوا قوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا وقودها الناس والحجارة عليها ملائكة غلاظ شداد لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. People, help yourselves and help your family and keep them and safeguard them from the hellfire of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is serious business out there. If you're a parent, alhamdulillah, you're probably safe. But they're after the younger generation. The atheistic movement is far more strong than the Christian movement, the evangelical circles, and of course, without a doubt, the Jewish movement as well. The atheists are out there and they're strong. They're not looking for you. If you're in your 40s and above, they're not looking for you. But they are looking for our young ones. Allahumma ahfadh shababana. Allahumma ahfadh shababana.